Hi there and welcome to a new lesson. So basically in this one we are going to be discussing the difference between the two main nodes that exist in order to create, in this case, 2D particles, okay? So let's first actually delete this scene that we are not going to be using anymore. This was just a quick test, so let's select it and click delete and then here remove the delete key basically, and then let's close it without saving, okay? So if we want to add here other node to the hierarchy and we look for particles, well, in this case for 2D we have these two, okay, CPU particles and GPU particles. And well, basically here the description, I would say that it's not quite accurate because the only thing that differentiates them according to this description is basically that this one is rendered by the CPU and this one is rendered by the GPU. But well, we don't have much information about that. So just by adding them, so I will create here a scene with CPU particles and then I will create other here with GPU particles. You can start at the first sight noticing lots of differences. First you have here like some kind of box in the GPU particles and we have here an error, and in the CPU particles, well, we don't see that box. And here in the options, as you can see, we see much more options in the CPU particles, at least by default, than in the GPU particles. As you can see, we don't have that much fields as we have in the CPU particles, okay? So let's quickly go over the differences about both. So first of all, Godot does provide quite an accurate documentation about 2D particle systems. And actually I think that some things from here actually apply to also 3D, okay? But this documentation at least is more focused on just the 2D, okay? So we will get into the 3D when the time comes. So I would really recommend to here give it a read, okay, because here we are going to be able to find more detailed information about these particles and also maybe some other information that I don't directly cover here in this lesson because, well, there is a lot of information here for sure. So first of all, some quick differences between them that we have already talked about. That well, firstly here like the setup that they have by default. And then that the GPU particles, basically they use the GPU to process the particles, and the CPU particles, of course, as their name, they are processed by the CPU, okay? So they are different ways of rendering these particles, and basically the CPU particles have a lower performance when using large amount of particles. So if you want to actually render lots of particles, probably the most optimized way of doing that would be with the GPU particles, okay, because they have a better performance when using lots of particles. And also here now in terms of the options here, as you can see, they are a little bit different because, well, in both we do have here in the same place the emitting an amount, okay, but well, basically here in the GPU particles we don't have all these options here, or most of the options. Because why? Because GPU particles here work with something that is called a process material, okay? Basically here this warning, here it also tells us that we must use a material in order to have some kind of behavior inside of our particles. So if we actually here go ahead and create a new process material, and you can also use a shader, but well, we're not going to be talking about shaders in this course. We can here create a new particle process material, and there we're going to be seeing the particles. And well, here we are going to have lots of options that are going to be quite similar to ones that we have in CPU particles. As you can see here, we have the time, basically this. I will open them up so that we can see them better. Some of them at least. So here, as you can see in the spawn, we have here the position, the angle, the velocity. And here in CPU particle, we do have here the scale, we have here the velocity, we also have here the gravity, okay, and we also have it over here in gravity. So as you can see, the options are quite similar, so there is going to be no issue without the one that you particularly want to use. Here if you zoom in, okay, you're going to see here the particles, the default particles, and here we also see the default particles. So as you can see, they seem like they are quite similar, but well, here they are falling faster because they have more gravity. And well, the way in which they are created may change a little bit, because here, for example, inside the spawn options, inside the position, you have here the emission shape. For example, let me make this a little bit bigger. Here inside of spawn position, we have the emission shape, and actually here in CPU particles, the emission shape, we have it just here. Okay, so where to find some options, maybe a little bit different. We may have more options or less options depending on which one we use. We may have some options or others also depending which one we use, but in the most general cases you can literally have the exact same effect using both of them. Just remember that the CPU particles have lower performance when using large amount of particles, so if you really want to have a lot of particles in your scene and you are going to have lots of things that may not be so good for performance, make sure that you are using the CPU particles. But at least for this course that we are just going to be focusing on creating the particle effects, basically using GPU particles or CPU particles is not going to have huge impact on the actual particle. Okay, just that maybe some values you have to tweak them differently. Okay, you have maybe more values to modify, etc. So basically these are the most important differences between CPU and GPU particles. Other important thing that you may have over here talking about when to use each one, actually their compatibility is actually so good that you can convert the GPU particles into a CPU one and the other way around. So basically, for example, here I can select here the GPU particles and here click over here on the toolbar and I can convert it to a CPU particle. Okay, and as you can see the results are going to be quite similar. Okay, and the same thing it happens here with the CPU particles. I can click over here and I can convert it to a GPU particles. So overall, the important thing here is that you understand how to create these particles and not actually you don't really have to consider the differences between both of them, because you can always just convert to the other one if you can find a certain option. So actually, which of these two nodes using is not going to be a big deal. Just use the one that you really want, and then if you change your mind, you can always convert it here to the other type of particle. Hi there and welcome to a new lesson. Basically what I will be teaching in this one is basically how you actually implement these particles in a game, because of course we are going to be able to create these particles, but then the idea of this course is that then you implement it into some project that you already have created or in any other project that you create in the near future. So to actually implement these particles, first of all, I will delete here these GPU particles that I have over here, and I will only be having here these CPU particles. Actually, let's rename it because, well, I was converting, remember here, this into different particles for showcasing this. So I will just save this scene as a quick test. Okay, I will only have like these particles over here, and what I will do is basically attach a script here. Okay, I will attach an empty script. Okay, so here I have it. Okay, and basically here all particles have this emitting property. Okay, so this could either be on or false. Okay, and this is quite easy to understand. If this is on, it means that the particle is going to be emitting, and if this is off, it will stop emitting. Okay, as simple as that. So actually, just for educational purposes and in order to be able to actually see our particles a little bit better, what we are going to create here is a pretty basic code, and the only thing that we'll check is that if we are pressing the enter key in our keyboard, we will change emitting to true. Because what happens over here is that if we turn off emitting and here in time we turn on one shot, okay, and if we enable here emitting, what will happen is that the particles will emit once and then will stop the loop. Okay, because by default, as you can see, they are basically looping. But well, if we enable one shot, for example, let's change here the amount. Basically, the amount is the amount of particles that is going to be created. Let's change it to 2. So as you can see, there we have 2 particles and no more particles are instantiated. Okay, so basically this is for when we create, for example, the heat or explosion particles that I want to actually see it in the scene. Okay, this will make much more sense when we actually start creating the particles, and this will also be helpful for when you want to implement the particles, because we are going to be having 2 types of particles. Some particles that are going to be like static, basically like the fire, the rain, that probably you are not going to be changing its position, its emission, etc. They are going to be always on the same place, always emitting, etc. But then we're going to have other type of particles that could be only be emitted in some certain situation. Okay, for example, the heat, we are only going to be emitting the heat when we actually hit something, hit the enemy or whatever. So we actually have to learn how to emit that particle correctly. So in this case, we're just going to be emitting it when we click the enter on our keyboard. And to check this, of course, we are going to be using the process delta, okay? And well, because here remember that this function is called in every frame, okay? So always we want to be checking here if we are pressing here the enter, okay? So that's why I'm going to be using here the input class, and then here I will be using isActionJustPressed, okay? Because basically I want to detect when I'm just pressing the in this case it is the UI action, okay? And I will explain what the UI action is, and here basically I will write pass for now at least. If we go to projects and then project settings, and here we go to input map, well, we don't see any input created, any action, but well, if we turn on here show built-in actions, we actually have here the UI accept, okay? That is the exact same one that we're using over here. So basically we have here the enter, the keep pay enter, that I don't really know which one this is. Actually, I think it's like other kinds of enter that may be in some kinds of keyboard, and also the space, okay? So basically every time that we hit the enter or the space, this condition is going to be true. So basically in this case, when I press the space or the enter, the only thing that I want to do is to change this emitting property to true. Okay, so I will just here call emitting equal true. Okay, now I will move my particle, let's say, to the center of the screen or something like that. But as you can see, even though I may emit the particle, as you can see, we don't really see nothing unless we zoom in. And even here, if we try to play and press here the enter, as you can see, well, we can see it, but well, it is quite difficult. So as you can see, if I press nothing, nothing will happen. But well, if I press the space, then I have my particles, or if I click the enter, I will be having there some kind of particles, okay? But well, what I wanted just here to quickly do is to scale the particles in so we can see it a little bit better. So just for testing, I will disable one shot and enable emitting so that I can actually see the changes without having here to enable emitting. So here the scale, I will basically give it a minimum of, let's say, 40 and a maximum of 40 as well. And I will basically increase here the gravity. Okay, so that's even a little bit more, maybe it's something like 300. Okay. So now basically let's turn off emitting and turn on one shot again. So the only thing that I did over here was to scale in the particles a little bit. And also I had to increase the gravity because, well, they were bigger. So I wanted to have like some kind of separation between the particles to differentiate the two particles. Because if not, as you saw, like the two particles were super close to each other and it seemed like there was only one particle, but well, there were actually two. So here, as you can see, if now I don't press anything, nothing will happen. But well, as soon as I click the enter, there I have my two particles and I have no more other particles. Okay, so that is quite good. Okay, so this is basically a behavior that you may have then when you actually want to implement some kind of particle. You will basically change the emitting property to true. And well, of course, this may really depend on your exact game, because other things that you may do here just for you to consider is to change the position of the particle. Basically, you may want to emit this particle. For example, if it's where the hit particle, you will want to emit that hit at the exact place where the hit happens. Basically, if, for example, the player shot the enemy, well, then the particle should be emitted at the place where the bullet collided, okay? For example. Or then, for example, in other script, you would actually, for example, instantiate the particle, okay? Before doing all this, actually, you would instantiate the particle in some kind of other manager script, in the player script, etc., depending on your project, and then you would turn emitting to true, and then you would set its position, okay? This is for you to understand how the flow would work in your game, but again, it would really depend on your exact project. That's why I'm not really going any deeper, okay? But always, probably you're going to have to change this emitting property to true. So now with this, let's basically delete here this scene that I'm not going to be using, and let's close it as well. And here I'm going to rename this script, okay, here let's right click it and then here on rename, and I basically just want to call it particle 2D, okay, like this. Now in our following class we will actually start creating the different particles, so see you in the next one. Hello there and welcome to the first lesson in which we will actually start creating the particles, okay? So in this one we'll basically create the heat or explosion particles, okay? Before doing that, I will actually organize here the project a little bit better. We already have a script, so just to keep things organized, I will create a brand new folder that I will call scripts, and I will drag and drop there the corresponding script. Also, as I told you in the introduction, we'll have some 2D and 3D particles. Actually, we're going to have a total of 10 scenes, 5 being 2D and the other 5 being 3D. So to keep things organized, I will create a scenes folder. Not only that, but also the divisions for 2D scenes, okay, and also for 3D scenes. Okay, quite simple. Then here on my empty scene, I will create here CPU particles 2D, okay? Again, remember that you can always convert this into a GPU particles and the other way around. So the process is going to be quite similar, let's say, as I explained already in other lessons, so I will not really get any deeper on that. I will actually use CPU particles for the 2D particles and GPU particles for the 3D ones. Why? Because remember that CPU particles have less performance than GPU particles. So basically, I will be using GPU particles for the 3D particles due to the fact that, well, 3D usually takes a little bit more resources than 2D. So just to keep things performant and for you to understand both particles, we will be using both, okay? One for 2D and the other for 3D, but it could be the other way around, or you could vary, okay? Because always remember that you can convert them accordingly. So once that is clear, I will call this one heat 2D, and I will save it inside my scenes, okay? And in 2D, of course. So the first thing is, when would you use these heat or explosion particles? So the name is quite, I would say that it really helps you get an idea of when you would use here these heat particles, but basically you would use them when, for example, there is a player that has been shot, okay? Even you could use this for when there is some object that has been collected, for example, a coin in a platformer. You could have here these explosion particles. It is some kind of explosion actually, but well, I also named it heat because, as I told you, if there is a character that is hit, shot, etc., you could use it. So basically those are the two main usages, okay? Basically collecting some kinds of coin or other collectible object that you may have, and when a player is being hit, okay? So to begin with this, as you can see, we don't really see any kind of particles because, well, by default they are quite small. So the first thing that I will start by doing is using this circle as the texture, okay? Because currently, well, they are squares, okay? And they could work, but I like much more having their circles. I think that for most type of games would fit better, but you can use the squares if you want. So basically here inside of drawing, we can here set the texture, okay? So I will basically quick load here the circle, but here you could literally use anything. You could use even the good old icon if you wanted, so there is no problem with that. But well, you have to consider that, for example, depending on the texture that you load in, the scale will change because of course this circle is much bigger than the default square. So you would have to also toggle the, for example, the velocity, the scale, etc. So once we have this, the first thing that you notice is that we have gravity, and in explosions and in heat particles we don't usually have gravity, okay? We don't have a force that pulls down our particles. We just have like the center of the particle, and from there the explosion is emitted, but we don't have a force that pulls our objects down. So here in gravity we can go ahead and disable it. Okay, so all the particles will just stay in the same place due to the fact that they have no forces that are being applied at the moment. So what I will do over here is I will set an initial velocity so that our particles would actually be able to move. You can set a minimum and a maximum, so I will just set to 150 and 200, okay? And well, we do see them that they are moving around. And you may be thinking, why are they completely moving like to the right? And this is because of the direction of the particle, okay? Because well, the direction here set to 1 in the x, so basically this would be emitted to the right. Or well, if you set it to -1, it would emit to the left, for example. So let's leave it here to 1, and here the actual option that is important is the spread, okay? If we set this to 180, it will actually emit like in a 360 angle. So this will allow us to have this spread that we need in explosions, because we always in explosions want to have the particles spread all around like in a kind of circle, okay? So the first thing that you may notice is the amount of particles, okay? Because well, I don't think that these particles amounts are going to be enough for an actual explosion. So let's change this to something like 15. And well, there we do have some kind of amount. Also, other thing that you notice over here is that, well, they just, once they reach their lifetime, that is 1 second, okay, the particle lives for 1 second and basically it is deleted. Instead of doing that, something that is quite usual is that they are fade out with the scale. Basically, here inside of scale, we don't really need to modify here the scale because I think the size is good, but we can have here scale amount curve. So basically this curve will allow us to modify their scaling over time. So basically, for example, initially their scale could be 1, but at the end of their lifetime, they could basically like fade out. Basically, their scale would end up being 0, okay? And as always, you can modify this curve as you want. You can even select here a point and, well, modify it differently, okay? Doing something like this, or you can also add more points if you really want. But, well, here we will just basically fade out. Let's say the particles scale out, actually, the particles, okay? Now for explosions, there is here quite a handy option because, well, here this doesn't really look like an explosion. Here there is quite a handy option that is called explosiveness, okay? So basically, this what it's going to be doing is to create some cycles, some bursts inside of our particles. So they are not going to be like always being emitted. We want to have some cycles, some bursts. So we can set this explosiveness to be 1. And well, there we do have it there. Quite interesting explosive effect. So that was like the magic for this. I think that particles live for too much time. So basically I would decrease their lifetime to something like 0.75. So now as you can see, they live much, they don't live that much, because for example, particles reach like here, let's say, but well, if this time is 1, as you can see, they live for a lot of time. And also it seems like it is a little bit slow here at the beginning. So you can see until they completely move out from the initial point, it is quite slow. That's why I like better to make them live a little bit less. And also due to the fact that usually these particles are emitted constantly. For example, in a game, if you shot a player, well, you will probably hit the player multiple times, so you would have multiple hits to the particles. So they have to be fast, because if not, it wouldn't be like dynamic. That's why we are doing this. And let's basically move this, like, let's say to the center of the screen. And also let's basically turn on one shot. Okay, so now it would only emit once. Now if we play, okay, nothing will happen, because we need to attach here the script that we created. And remember that, well, when we click it, when we press the enter or the spacebar, we would emit the particle. So now if I click enter, well, there I have my particle, or if I click the spacebar, the same thing will happen. So there we are going to be having the heat or explosion particle 2D in Godot.